Everyone had already given up on him. His teachers had stopped trying, his classmates whispered about him behind his back, and even his own father, one of the most powerful men in the country, looked at him with nothing but disappointment. To them, Lucas Reed was a failure wrapped in expensive clothing. But then, one ordinary morning in the quietest corner of the school, something happened. A janitor, a black woman that nobody ever really paid attention to, spoke a single line. Just a few words, but they landed like a thunderclap inside Lucas's mind. He had always thought she was just there to mop floors, another faceless worker in the background of his privileged life. He had no idea she was about to sweep away the lies he told himself and expose a truth he had never dared to face. Lucas Reed wasn't just any student. He was the heir to the Reed fortune, the only son of Charles Reed, a self-made tech billionaire whose face graced the cover of Forbes with the regularity of the changing seasons. Charles Reed was the kind of man other men envied and feared at the same time. A cold, ruthless visionary who built an empire out of sheer intelligence and unbreakable will. Lucas, on the other hand, had been born into luxury. His life was a carousel of extravagance, vacations on private islands, fleets of luxury cars waiting in the garage, birthday parties where Hollywood stars sang him, "Happy Birthday." From the outside, it looked like the perfect life. But buried under all that wealth was a hollow emptiness. Lucas had everything, except purpose. By the time he turned 17, Lucas was enrolled at one of the most elite private high schools in Atlanta. Not because he deserved to be there, not because he had aced the entrance exams or impressed anyone with brilliance. No, his last name alone was the golden key that unlocked doors. No interviews, no tests, no hard work, just a fat donation and the weight of reputation. While other kids sweated over essays and interviews, Lucas strolled in without lifting a finger. Inside the school's marble hallways, decorated with portraits of alumni who had gone on to become senators, CEOs, and even governors, Lucas wasn't admired. He was infamous. Students and faculty alike knew him for three things: his arrogance, his designer suits and watches that screamed money, and his absolute inability to succeed academically. His grades weren't just low, they were embarrassing. His report cards looked more like comedy sketches than academic records. And the teachers? They didn't dare fail him. They passed him out of fear, knowing that upsetting a Reed could cost the school a fortune in donations. Lucas thrived on this. He loved the way people tiptoed around him, afraid to say what they really thought. Why should he care about grades anyway? Lucas was convinced that school was beneath him. He told himself he didn't need knowledge when he already had power. Someday, the Reed empire would be his to command, and what difference could a GPA possibly make? When his literature teacher tried to reason with him once, Lucas just smirked and said, "You think Shakespeare matters when my last name can open any door in the world?" He wore his arrogance like a crown. One afternoon, the school counselor called him into her office. She wanted to talk about his failing grades, about his future. Lucas leaned back in the chair, smirking with that same lazy confidence, and delivered a line that would echo through the school for weeks. "I could buy this school if I wanted to. What grade is going to change that?" His words spread like wildfire across the campus, whispered in hallways and repeated in locker rooms. Students laughed at the audacity, and teachers shook their heads, but nobody confronted him. Why would they? Everyone knew the Reed donation kept the school's lights on. At home, things weren't any better. Charles Reed was not the kind of father to shrug off failure. He had built his empire from nothing, and excuses were poison in his world. One evening, after yet another call from the school about Lucas's behavior, Charles finally snapped. He stood in the living room, his voice like ice, and said, "You're an embarrassment. If you worked for me, I'd fire you on the spot." Lucas rolled his eyes, crossing his arms, and fired back, "But I'm not your employee. I'm your son." Charles didn't flinch. His eyes were steel. "The world doesn't care. Either you become someone, or you'll just be another rich kid with a last name and no spine. And let me be clear, I won't carry you." The silence that followed was heavier than any punishment. For the first time, Lucas felt something close to fear. His father wasn't bluffing. He meant every word. The next day, Lucas walked into school like nothing had happened. He pulled into the faculty parking lot in his sleek black Audi, a car most adults could only dream of owning. He strutted down the hallways like they were his personal runway. Some students stared in envy, wishing they could live his life. Others sneered, disgusted by his arrogance. But Lucas didn't care. To him, they were all beneath him. Except one person. Near the side entrance, an older black woman, likely in her 50s, was mopping the floor. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hands calloused, but her posture was strong, upright. Her eyes were calm but sharp, as though she saw more than she let on. Lucas walked right past her without a second thought. To him, she was invisible. Just another worker in the background of his life. But life was about to change. Soon after, his world started collapsing. More tests, more failing grades. Then came the blow that shook him to the core. His father finally cut him off. No more credit cards. No more car. Charles even forced him to take the school bus like everyone else. For the first time, Lucas was stripped of the armor money had always provided. And on one of those bitter mornings, shuffling into school with his hands stuffed deep into his jacket pockets, Lucas heard something unusual. The janitor. She was mopping the floor near the entrance, her lips moving as she whispered softly to herself. At first, he thought it was just a song, but then he caught the words, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." Lucas froze. He turned to her and asked, "What did you just say?" The woman looked up at him, calm, unafraid, and replied, "Nothing you're ready to understand, boy." Lucas chuckled, trying to shrug it off, but something about her words cut deep. For the first time in his life, someone had spoken to him without fear, without flattery, without treating him like he was special. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, unsettled. But Lucas couldn't stop thinking about her. What if I fail again? Lucas asked one early morning, his voice low, almost trembling. Evelyn didn't blink. She looked him square in the eye and said, "Then you're finally doing it right." Those words sank into him like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything he thought he knew about learning. For the first time, failure wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. From that day on, the rhythm of Lucas's life began to change. Slowly, steadily, a new routine, almost sacred in its consistency, emerged. He started showing up earlier than anyone else. The school, usually a place he dreaded, became strangely different at dawn. The marble floors gleamed under the pale glow of the hallway lights, and the air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint hum of Evelyn's mop gliding across the tiles. There were no lectures waiting for him, no thick textbooks shoved into his hands. Evelyn didn't believe in pouring knowledge into someone like water into an empty cup. Instead, she asked questions. Sharp, disarming questions that sliced through his arrogance. "What did that sentence make you feel?" she'd ask, pointing to a line in Baldwin's notes of a native son. "Why do you think this character stayed silent?" she'd press, gesturing toward a passage in Morrison's The Bluest Eye. "Can you tell me what courage sounds like?" She never handed him answers. She provoked. She forced him to wrestle with the words, to dig through the layers of meaning until something inside him shifted. And slowly, miraculously it did. The books stopped feeling like punishment. Instead of chores, they became mirrors, showing him pieces of himself he had never dared to look at. Words that once looked like ink on a page now pulled at his gut, demanding to be felt, not just read. Lucas began to write, not about test answers, not about shallow summaries, but about his life. The blank notebook Evelyn had given him started filling up, page after page. He wrote about his father, about the crushing pressure of being Charles Reed's son. He wrote about the suffocating emptiness that haunted him despite all the luxury in the world. He wrote about anger, loneliness, fear, feelings he'd never admitted aloud. And Evelyn read every word. Not with judgment, but with an intensity that told him she wasn't just reading ink, she was reading him. One evening, while he sat in the cafeteria scribbling furiously in his notebook, two boys walked past. Their laughter was loud, cruel, meant to sting. Josh, the star quarterback, leaned over to his friend and sneered, "Look at little Reed now. Writing love letters to the janitor." The words hit like a punch. Lucas clenched his jaw, his fist tightening around his pen, ready to lash out, ready to reclaim the old arrogance that used to shield him. But before he could stand, Evelyn appeared beside him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You don't measure depth with a shallow ruler." Lucas froze. The insult vanished from his mind. That one line from Evelyn cut deeper than any mockery. It silenced the urge to fight, to prove himself. For the first time, he realized strength wasn't about striking back. It was about knowing who you were, no matter what others said. Later that night, as the cafeteria lights flickered and he walked home with his notebook tucked under his arm, Lucas's phone buzzed. It was a message from his father. "They updated your academic record. One last warning. Turn things around or you're out. No trust fund. No apartment. Nothing." Lucas stared at the screen for a long time. Normally, a message like that would have filled him with dread. But strangely, he didn't feel fear this time. He felt ready. Ready to prove something, not to his father, not to his classmates, but to himself. Friday arrived with a current of tension buzzing through the school. The air crackled with end-of-term energy. Report cards were being handed out. College counselors roamed the halls, cornering seniors about applications. Graduation meetings filled the offices. Everyone was talking about the future, what colleges they'd attend, what scholarships they'd received, what doors were opening. And in the middle of it all, Lucas walked through the crowd gripping a folder. Inside were redone assignments, essays marked with praise, and one piece in particular, a draft of an essay titled "The Illusion of Power," something Evelyn had challenged him to write. For the first time, he felt pride in something academic. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It was his. Maybe, just maybe, his father would be proud too. When he reached the counselor's office, his heart skipped. His father was already there. Charles Reed stood tall, dressed in a sharp gray suit, scrolling through his phone as if even time itself owed him interest. He didn't look up when Lucas entered. "You're late," Charles muttered coldly. "Let's get this over with." The counselor, visibly nervous in the presence of such power, handed over Lucas's new report. Lucas reached for it, but Charles snatched it first. He flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. The grades weren't perfect, far from it, but they were better. Significantly better. Notes from teachers praised his effort, his participation, his willingness to improve. Shows initiative. Active in class discussions. A significant change in attitude. Charles closed the folder with a snap. "This is what you call progress?" His voice dripped with disdain. "I'm trying," Lucas said softly. "I really am." "With who?" Charles demanded. "The last tutor quit." "Who's been helping you?" Lucas hesitated. He didn't want to betray Evelyn, to drag her into this storm. But deep down, he knew hiding her wasn't fair, not to her, not to himself. "It's Evelyn," he said at last. "The janitor." Silence. Charles blinked, then let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You're kidding." "She used to be a professor," Lucas said quickly. "She's a janitor," Charles cut in. "That's all that matters." "No," Lucas's voice rose, trembling with emotion. "She taught me more than any of your overpriced tutors. She taught me to think." Charles took a step forward, his voice low, almost threatening. "You're embarrassing this family. You're wasting time with people who have nothing to offer you." Lucas swallowed hard, but the words came anyway. "She sees me. You never did." For a moment, Charles looked at him like he didn't recognize his own son. Then, with cold precision, he said, "If you keep going down this road, you lose everything. No car. No money. No name. Don't test me." Lucas felt his throat tighten. His tongue burned with words he knew he shouldn't say, but he said them anyway. "Maybe I need to lose everything to figure out who I actually am." Charles's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He just turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall like a gavel strike. The following week was harder. Lucas was quieter, angrier, but not defeated. The kids at school noticed the change. Some mocked him openly now. Josh posted a video of Lucas sitting with Evelyn after hours, captioned, "Lessons from losers." Laughter followed, whispers spread, but Lucas didn't flinch. Instead, he walked to the school's public reading board, printed his essay, and pinned it up for everyone to see. The title read, "Learning doesn't make me weak. Ignorance does." Lucas Reed. The paper was gone the next morning, ripped down by someone, but it didn't matter. The message had already taken root. And when Monday morning came, the world seemed different. The rain had stopped. The sky was gray but calm. Lucas walked into school with a notebook in one hand, coffee in the other. He found Evelyn in the back hallway, mopping as usual. She looked up, eyebrow arched. "You're bringing peace offerings now?" "Coffee." "Coffee," Lucas said with a faint smile. "And something else." Evelyn studied his face. "You've got that look, the one people get right before they say something that changes everything." Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, notebook in hand. "I looked you up." Her eyes narrowed. "You what?" "Not in a creepy way," Lucas added quickly. "I just wanted to know. You quoted Socrates. You teach like someone with 20 years of experience." And then I found an article. Evelyn Wallace, tenured professor at the University of Chicago. Guest speaker. Published writer. Award winner. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "That woman existed. She just doesn't get invited back anymore." "What happened?" Lucas asked. Evelyn leaned on her mop handle, her voice heavy. "I blew the whistle on a plagiarism scandal. A powerful dean. I refused hush money. They shut me out. Permanently. Then my husband died. A car accident on his way to a conference I organized." Lucas's chest tightened. She had lost everything. And yet here she was, still standing, still teaching. "You lost everything," he whispered. "Everything," she said softly. "Except my mind. And my voice." Lucas nodded slowly. "Then I want to make you a deal." "A deal?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I want you to teach me. Really teach me, like I'm one of your college students. Don't hold back. Don't treat me like I'm fragile. I want to learn everything you know. I want to be someone, not because of my name, but because of what I do." Evelyn studied him carefully. Something had changed in his eyes. Not arrogance. Not defiance. Determination. "And what's your part of this deal?" she asked. "I won't quit," Lucas said firmly. "No matter how hard it gets. I'll fail. Relearn. Whatever it takes." Evelyn was silent for a long time. Then she extended her hand. "Then we've got a deal." They shook on it. No contracts. No signatures. Just truth. That week, the lessons intensified. Evelyn built a plan. Not around tests or grades, but around understanding. Lucas devoured Baldwin, Hughes, Morrison. He wrote reflections instead of essays, questions instead of answers. He began to wrestle not just with literature, but with himself, with injustice, with privilege, with purpose. And each night, he handed her a notebook filled with thoughts. Each night, she returned it filled with deeper questions. To the rest of the school, Lucas was still the arrogant heir trying to figure things out. But inside, in those quiet hours with Evelyn, something much bigger was happening. And one evening he surprised her. "This is Priya," Lucas said, gesturing to a shy girl from his biology class. "She wants to join us." Evelyn raised her eyebrows. For the first time, Lucas wasn't just learning. He was leading. The secret lessons began on a stormy Wednesday afternoon. Rain pelted against the tall windows of the library, drumming like restless fingers. Most students had already hurried home, but Lucas lingered, his pride still bruised from the ridicule he had faced earlier that morning. Evelyn noticed him sitting alone at a corner table, his head buried in his arms. She walked over, her footsteps soft but certain, and placed a worn notebook in front of him. "You're hiding your mind behind that silence," she said gently. "But silence isn't a cage, it's a key, if you know how to use it." Lucas raised his head, startled. For years he had trained himself to ignore the whispers of others, to pretend he didn't hear the laughter that followed him in the hallways. But Evelyn's words pierced through that armor, reaching the part of him he had carefully buried. "What if the key doesn't fit anywhere?" he muttered, barely audible. "It will," Evelyn replied firmly, her dark eyes glowing with conviction. "You just haven't found the right door yet." Let me show you how. That evening marked the beginning of their secret pact. When the classrooms emptied and the school corridors grew quiet, Lucas and Evelyn would meet in the library. She carried books others had long forgotten, volumes on logic, philosophy, and hidden patterns in literature. At first, Lucas resisted. His father had drilled into him that strength came from wealth, from dominance, from bending the world to your will. What good could dusty books and strange riddles do? But Evelyn never argued. She simply placed a new challenge before him each night. A puzzle, a riddle, a passage that seemed impossible to decode. At first, Lucas failed miserably. He grew frustrated, his pride boiling. "I'm not like you," he snapped once. "You think too differently. My father says thinking too much is weakness." Evelyn didn't flinch. She closed the book, folded her hands, and smiled. "Then prove him wrong. Show him that your mind can be your greatest strength. Show him that silence doesn't mean emptiness, it means focus." Something in her tone sparked a flame inside Lucas. That night he stayed longer than usual, poring over the pages, scribbling notes furiously. For the first time, he wasn't learning to impress his father or to escape shame. He was learning for himself. Weeks passed. Lucas began to change in ways that even he didn't recognize at first. His answers in class grew sharper, layered with insights no one expected from the boy who rarely spoke. Teachers started pausing when he raised his hand, shocked by the depth of his observations. Some classmates began whispering less, though a few mocked him still, calling his knowledge useless or nerdy. But Lucas no longer carried their words like chains. Evelyn had taught him that every insult could be converted into fuel. One winter morning, when the first frost painted the windows, Lucas solved a particularly difficult riddle Evelyn had given him. His excitement burst out before he could stop it. "I did it," he exclaimed, slamming his notebook shut. Evelyn's smile widened. "See? Your silence isn't weakness. It's the pause before the world hears something extraordinary." But their sessions did not remain hidden for long. The school administration began to notice Lucas's sudden transformation. Rumors spread about late-night meetings in the library. Some teachers admired Evelyn's unusual mentorship, but others grew suspicious. They whispered that she was stepping beyond her place, blurring the lines between student and guide. One afternoon, Principal Harding summoned Evelyn to his office. His voice was calm but laced with warning. "We've heard about these after-hours lessons. They're unconventional. Parents are beginning to ask questions. It may be best for you to step back." Evelyn returned to the library that evening, her face pale but her resolve unshaken. She told Lucas what had happened. For the first time, he felt fear, not for himself, but for her. "If they make you stop, I'll go back to being nothing," he admitted quietly. "You'll never be nothing," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "Because what you've learned can't be taken away. Knowledge, once planted, grows roots no one can pull out." Her words lingered in Lucas's heart. That night he studied harder than ever, determined to prove to himself, and to the world, that her guidance had not been in vain. Meanwhile, his father noticed the change too. At the dinner table, when Lucas answered a question with clarity and confidence, his father's eyes narrowed. "Since when did you become so bold?" he asked sharply. Lucas hesitated, then replied softly, "Since I started listening instead of shouting." The room fell silent. His father's fork clattered against the plate. Pride and confusion wrestled on his face, but Lucas did not flinch. Evelyn's lessons had given him a strength far different from what his father valued. As weeks turned into months, Lucas's newfound brilliance began to shine beyond the library. He wrote essays that stunned his teachers, solved problems that left older students baffled, and even began helping classmates who once mocked him. His silence, once a mark of shame, had transformed into an aura of mystery and respect. But the pressure on Evelyn grew heavier. The administration issued formal warnings, questioning why she continued to interfere. They saw her as a risk, someone stirring change where tradition demanded conformity. Still, Evelyn refused to step back. "Why do you keep risking yourself for me?" Lucas asked one night, frustration etched into his young face. "Because I see the world in you," Evelyn replied, her eyes moist but unwavering. And the world needs your kind of strength. That answer broke something open inside Lucas. For the first time, he realized that his journey was not just about proving himself to his father or silencing his bullies. It was about becoming a voice for others who were overlooked, silenced, or forgotten. Evelyn had given him more than knowledge. She had given him a purpose. The lessons continued, hidden but unbroken. The rainstorms came and went, the seasons shifted, and Lucas's confidence blossomed. Yet every step forward carried the weight of uncertainty, for they both knew that discovery by the wrong person could end everything. And so, beneath the quiet glow of the library lamps, amidst the rustle of forgotten books and the echo of falling rain, Lucas and Evelyn built a world of their own, a world where silence was no longer a curse, but a beginning. The room stood in silence, the kind of silence that carried weight, pressing down on every chest as Lucas lowered the microphone. His final words still lingered in the air, hanging heavy and yet strangely liberating. For the first time in years, Lucas didn't feel like the timid boy who hid in the shadows of his father's disapproval. He wasn't just Evelyn's son anymore, he was Evelyn's voice. Every line of his speech had been a piece of her, stitched together with his courage, and now it belonged to the world. The applause came a heartbeat later, slow at first, then swelling into a thunderous wave that shook the hall. But Lucas barely heard it. The real victory wasn't in the noise, it was in the quiet realization blooming in his chest. His mother's lessons, whispered at kitchen tables and sung in lullabies, had not been buried with her. They lived inside him, alive and defiant, echoing louder now than ever before. That was the true triumph, the kind no trophy could capture. He glanced down at the golden plaque in his trembling hands, his name engraved beneath the words, "First Place." For others, it was a symbol of achievement, but for Lucas, it was something deeper. It was proof that his mother's voice had survived the silence. Proof that resilience could outshine grief. Proof that he, a boy once overlooked and dismissed, had found the strength to stand where no one expected him to. Across the hall, his father, Richard, sat frozen in his chair. The man who had built walls of steel around his emotions now found them crumbling. He had walked into this hall expecting little more than a polite performance from his son. What he witnessed instead was a fire he didn't know Lucas carried. Every word had been Evelyn, her gentleness, her stubbornness, her unyielding truth, reborn through Lucas. Richard's throat tightened as realization washed over him. He had been so determined to silence his son, to shape him into his own image, that he had nearly extinguished the brightest flame Evelyn left behind. When the applause finally faded, Richard stood. Not for the crowd, not out of obligation, but because his heart demanded it. His hands came together in a slow, deliberate clap that grew steadier with each beat. The room noticed. The father who had always been distant, who rarely showed warmth, now clapped with tears shining in his eyes. For the first time, Lucas saw pride, raw and unguarded, glowing in his father's face. As Lucas stepped down from the stage, trophy clutched to his chest, Richard moved forward, cutting through the crowd. The boy and the man stood face to face, their history of unspoken words and unhealed wounds stretching between them. Richard's lips parted, struggling against years of silence. "Your mother, she would be so proud," he whispered, his voice breaking. Lucas's eyes burned, not from the bright stage lights but from the truth in his father's tone. He had waited years for acknowledgement, for even the smallest fragment of validation. Now it had come, not in grand speeches, but in a quiet sentence that carried more weight than applause ever could. The two embraced, an awkward, hesitant hug at first, but one that grew tighter, anchored in a grief they both shared and a love they had nearly lost sight of. For years, grief had been their battlefield, each fighting it alone, each too stubborn or too broken to reach for the other. But in that moment, Evelyn's presence surrounded them, softening their jagged edges and guiding them back together. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. Wounds as deep as theirs didn't heal overnight. But as they walked out of the hall side by side, for the first time in a long while, Lucas felt the possibility of a future where father and son weren't strangers bound by tragedy, but partners bound by love. Weeks later, the Evelyn Institute was born. What began as an idea whispered during late-night conversations between Lucas and Richard became a living, breathing reality. The Institute wasn't just a building, it was a beacon. Its doors opened wide for children who felt unheard, for young dreamers who carried voices the world had tried to silence. Inside its walls, stories found a stage, music found an audience, and truth found a home. On the day of the grand opening, Lucas stood in the lobby, surrounded by portraits of his mother. Each image captured her in a different light, smiling with her students, speaking at rallies, laughing in candid moments. Her spirit filled the place like sunlight, and Lucas knew she was still guiding them. Richard stood at his side, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder, no longer the man who tried to mold Lucas into someone else, but a father learning to embrace who his son already was. The ribbon was cut, cameras flashed, and visitors poured in. Some came curious, others desperate for hope, but all left touched by what the Institute offered. It wasn't just Evelyn's legacy anymore, it was Lucas's too. Through him, her voice would never fade. As the first evening fell over the Institute, Lucas stood by the large glass window, watching the lights glow against the dark sky. He thought of his mother, of every word she had spoken to him when he was small, of every lesson she had planted in his heart. "Your voice matters," she had said once. "Never let anyone take it from you." And now, looking out at the world beyond those windows, Lucas finally believed it. His voice had become more than just his own. It was an anthem for anyone who had ever been silenced, a torch for anyone stumbling through the shadows of grief. Evelyn had given him the gift of truth, and he had given it back to the world. Richard joined him at the window, silent at first, then speaking softly. "She's still with us, you know. Every word, every smile, it's all here." Lucas nodded, his chest swelling with a bittersweet ache. "And she always will be." They stood together, father and son, their silhouettes outlined against the glow of the Evelyn Institute. The world outside was vast and uncertain, but inside those walls burned a light that promised hope. It was proof that even in the face of unbearable loss, love could rebuild. Truth could survive. And silence, no matter how heavy, could never bury a legacy born of courage. The Evelyn Institute shone that night like a lighthouse against the storm, a reminder that the echoes of one woman's voice had become the foundation for countless others. And at its heart stood Lucas, no longer a boy haunted by silence, but a young man carrying forward a legacy too powerful to ever fade. And so, Lucas's journey reminds us that even in the darkest of times, love and truth have the power to break every silence. His story isn't just about music, it's about resilience, about honoring the ones we've lost, and about finding strength where the world expects weakness. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more lives can be changed when we share it. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to your channel, and ring the bell so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. Tell us in the comments, what does resilience mean to you? Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember, your voice matters.